The middle of nowhere once again is called out to the swamp, begging for us to share more stories to freak you out. Welcome back to the swamp, my friends, and welcome if you're new. Today I'm going to be sharing some creepy and allegedly true middle of nowhere horror stories sent in by viewers just like you. As always, if you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, whether it's a story from the middle of nowhere or something entirely different, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'm always looking for brand new scary stories to share on the channel, and I would love to share yours. If you're not aware, I recently started streaming on Twitch 2 to 3 times a week. If you're a fan of scary games, VR, and just all around good times with the Swamp Dweller in the community, be sure to give me a follow over there. There's a link in the description. I'd be very appreciative to see you guys join me over there. Now, without further ado, let us jump into these allegedly true and downright terrifying middle of nowhere horror stories that'll creep you out tonight. Hey swamp folk, are you looking for something to do while listening to scary stories in the swamp? Well, currently I'm playing Hero Wars. Finally, I have found something to do with my spare time in between stories. Currently, I am leveling Rufus. No, that is not my pet. Rufus is actually a very strong and vibrant character in the cool action RPG Hero Wars. Besides characters like Rufus, who absolutely dominates the battlefield, I've unlocked 15 other characters. Epic heroes like Galahad, or Quinn Mao and her dragon, or Mojo and his totem of wrath. Each hero has a set of skins that also boost their stats. Complete missions and get rewards, awesome equipment, coins, and even soul stones for the best heroes. Get more XP, improve your skills, and don't forget to try every one of the game modes. There are 6 different game modes, by the way. My favorite of which definitely has to be the guild mode. Not only can I fight other guilds over there, but I can also fight using titans. Get 5 awesome heroes. Who's the 5th? You'll know after downloading. Hero Wars is available on mobile and on PC. Join the game now and get a super chest with a secret hero as well as 600 emeralds and 30,000 gold. Scan this QR code or download the game from the link down below in the video description. I'll see you in game, swamp folk. I have been contemplating submitting my stories, and while listening to the Mississippi Horror Stories episode, one story reminded me of my experience that I have been thinking of sharing. I want to share more in the future, but this one is the most recent. I am a young woman in my early 20s. I am a full-time college student, but I like to travel as much as I can because I do photography. And this past year, I have picked up solo traveling and road trips. I live in North Carolina, and as I was driving on my way back from visiting Atlanta, Georgia, I have been making this trip since I was a child because my family is from around there, and since traveling on my own, I had made this trip quite a few times. I am very comfortable making this trip. I like traveling late at night because there's no traffic, so the time frame of this story is between 1 to 2 a.m. I am in the middle of nowhere, South Carolina at the time. It couldn't have been too middle of nowhere because I was on the interstate, and I'm familiar with this interstate, but there is a part that doesn't have much of anything for quite a while. I had not seen any signs for gas stations. The signage was all dirty and outdated. You know the look. So I knew I was in the country, but I didn't really know where I was in the country, and I really had to use the bathroom. I usually try to avoid rest stops late at night, but I had a feeling one was coming up before a gas station, and sure enough, one came up in about 2 miles. I am pulling in and notice it seems very desolate. You know, when you're in an area that just seems like it hasn't seen people in quite a while, but at the same time, there were a couple of cars in the parking lot, and the parking lot on the other side was full of 18-wheelers. So I really wasn't nervous at all about going to the bathroom. I'm not a very fearful person in general. As I am pulling into the parking lot, you know how rest stops are, usually just the one way in and one way out. I am driving in, taking note of the cars in the parking lot, and right as the parking lot starts, I notice a truck or SUV with a trailer. Parked right by the entrance, but there's no parking spaces. It's just facing out towards the parking lot. So it's a decent distance from the main building, parked parallel to the driveway that brings you in. I hope this is making sense. So, I notice this, and I don't really think anything about it. For some reason, I tell myself no one is in there. It was very dark and I couldn't see in the windows when I passed by. I pulled into the closest spot possible to the bathroom. I am about to turn off my car, but I wait to situate myself a little, taking off my headphones, grabbing trash, and waiting to see if someone comes out of the bathroom. I also decide to say a little prayer. I specifically said, "God, please keep me safe," but I know you will, like you always do. I am not bothered at all because I really need to use the bathroom, and just as I am about to get out of the car, I decide to look at my surroundings again. There are 3 cars in total in the parking area, one of which is parked beside me, another behind me in the direction of the entrance, and the SUV I previously described. And now I notice their headlights were on. I cannot definitively remember them being on or not when I drove past, but I do remember barely being able to see the vehicle in the first place. So I assumed they turned them on when I pulled into my spot. Because of how they were parked facing towards the parking lot, their lights were shining right in the direction of my car. I found this kind of weird, but I thought maybe they could be walking their dog or something. But I looked and saw no one outside. I looked at the other 2 cars in the parking lot, too, and noticed still no one had come out of either one of them. I also noticed they seemed like they had not been turned on in a while either. This probably sounds crazy, but I just felt the coldness from the vehicles, like the engine had not been running a little while, and that was extremely odd to me, that there were cars further back behind me that were completely fogged up. That thick, watery condensation fog, as if somebody had been sitting in there, breathing. Now, maybe there were people getting high or having sex in there, maybe even both. But like I said, it just gave the feeling like it had not been turned on in a while, and both vehicles I assumed were empty for sure. That's why I was waiting to see if at least one of the owners would come out from the bathroom or not. I just wanted to see some type of movement before I left my car, and usually if there are cars at the rest stop, you're bound to see someone going in or out. Some type of movement at least. But I just couldn't shake that feeling that something was off. I was convinced that these 2 other cars had been sitting a while, and that was just too odd to me because who would leave 2 seemingly perfect cars in the middle of nowhere, South Carolina at a rest stop? A completely empty parking lot would have been more comforting to me. And why was this one vehicle facing me with their lights on? As I previously mentioned, I am not a very scared person. I believe you attract your fears and such through negative thinking, and I believe if you conjure negative thoughts, negative things will come to you. So it was very disturbing to me when I pictured myself going to the bathroom and being attacked on my way out. I am rarely paranoid, and this is the most paranoid I have felt in a long time. I never even turned my car off. I looked at the completely fogged up car one more time and said, "Nope, not tonight." I never pulled out so fast of a rest area in my life, and I didn't feel scared, I felt extremely relieved. And as I pulled off, it was like I could see the people or individual watching me drive away, and I heard a deep voice in my head say, "You made the right choice." I really felt that something bad was going to happen to me if I went to the bathroom. I am a proud supporter of following my gut and intuition. Maybe nothing would have happened, but I wasn't about to try it and find out. I believe God protected me by prompting me to wait and analyze my surroundings. I know this was not the most scariest or most climactic story, but thank you for sharing it anyway. I think it does have value on your show. Hey Swamp Dweller, my name is Sam, and I'm from a small town in central Wisconsin. I'll keep the name out of it for anonymity reasons. I've got a few stories I'll try and send in, but here's the first I'd like to share. This isn't exactly super scary, but more so strange and almost terrifying in a way. I'll start by saying I'm a bit of a night owl and a fitness fanatic, and love to go out for late night runs around my town, and this night was no different. So on this night I was running one of my normal routes that go through the town and in more of a rural, more middle of nowhere type area, if that makes sense. I went past and around a loop that goes around the town's movie theater that is kind of like a subdivision or cul-de-sac. On the way back to the loop, I ran past a convenience store and gas station on the opposite side of the road from which I had come originally. Just after the gas station is our little town's fire station, and I noticed a larger man standing in front of the station with a shopping bag. Most likely he had been in the gas station buying food. I thought nothing of him, and he wasn't really bothering me. I was on the opposite side of the road, and honestly, he probably never saw me as it was dark out. As I ran down the road a bit further and down to another street, I came to an intersection of two streets by our town city park, and the same man was walking further down the street as I crossed it. He didn't notice me since his back was to me, but he was wearing the same exact clothes and had that shopping bag in his hand. I honestly got a laugh out of it because I know I was moving faster than him, so I don't know how he got in front of me. It's kind of one of those things that has made my brain kind of glitch out, and it's just so strange. I just went about my night like nothing happened and tried to focus on my training. I'm no stranger to seeing very weird things in the late night, and I thought this was share-worthy. I know it's short and kind of to the point, but the question that has remained and lingered for years now is, how did that guy essentially teleport in front of me? Was I seeing some sort of apparition? Was I just somehow hallucinating it? Or did this person somehow just figure out a way to move so much faster than me without anybody noticing? I'd love to know any ideas in the comments down below. Like I said, not the most scary story, but downright terrifying in some ways. I would like to tell you about a few strange things about the small town in Pennsylvania where I grew up in. It sits sandwiched between the Connedawinet Creek and the Susquehanna River. Alongside the creek is a decent-sized patch of woods, and there is a trail into the woods you can walk down that is near a railroad track. The trail leads down to the creek and another trail into the woods, and it passes an open field. There is something strange about the field itself. When you pass it, you can feel it in the air, like it has its own presence. I've walked into that field twice. The first time was because I grew frustrated and wanted to know what was in it. All I found that time were a few large chunks of iron ore and many animal bones from small animals. The second time I walked into the field was during winter. There was a light dusting of snow coating the ground, and I wanted to just be able to have a nice long walk in the trail and crisp air. However, when I was passing the field, I saw a large dark circle on the ground. I walked up to it to get a better view and saw that it looked like the ground was scorched, and all around it were animal tracks leading to the circle, but none of them walking away from it. I hurried home to tell my mom about it, feeling creeped out the entire walk back as though I was being watched. My mom said that she saw the same thing when she was younger. I never set foot in that field again after that. There are also a lot of ghost sightings in this town. Everyone I'd ever known in this town had their own experiences of some sort, and if your house wasn't haunted, then that was out of the ordinary. You see, being a small town in the middle of nowhere and living in these houses that were hundreds of years old could yield some stories. My grandma lives in peace with the ghost in her house. She leaves things that make noise on the steps for it to tinker with, but it never moves them too far out of place. The most mischievous thing that it does is pull the blankets off my grandmother when she's trying to sleep. When staying there, I would hear footsteps walking back and forth in the upstairs hallway, up and down the steps, and hear the trinkets on the stairs make a bunch of noises. Not far down the road, there is also a building that used to be a police station, and when it was abandoned, I took a nap on one of the old benches that used to be there in the middle of the day. When I got up and went to walk back to my house, I felt hands on my shoulders grab me and push me, but no one was there. That incident left me with a small chunk of skin taken out of my knee. Also, when I was younger, I was looking out of the living room window at night and saw a man who had a weird white-green glow around him walking up the street in hiking gear. He had a walking stick with him. When he got to the streetlight, he just vanished into thin air. I later found out a few other people have seen him throughout the years as well, including my grandmother. At my great-grandmother's house, only 2 doors down from my grandmother, I was staying there one night when I walked through a ghost. I was going back upstairs when I was passing by the upstairs bathroom door. It got very thick in the air, incredibly cold, and suddenly felt electrically charged. It felt like cold pins and needles from the front of my body to the back. All the hair on my body stood up. I could smell perfume, but it wasn't any I've ever smelled before, and since my great-grandmother couldn't walk upstairs, I knew it was not her. I also felt sad and alone, but I couldn't identify what was causing this emotion. A few more incidents. There is a small swamp that popped up slowly over time between that creepy field and creek. My best guess would be from water underground that made its way up on the top side. The trail cuts through between the swamp and the creek, and there is a small runoff spot that leaks water from the swamp into the creek. My best friend and I saw strange prints in the mud heading from the swamp to the creek right next to the runoff. The prints looked like giant webbed hands with obvious claw marks in the mud, but it was obvious that whatever had made the prints had been bipedal. About 3 years later, that same best friend and I were walking down the street after dark, and we saw a green orb of light zip by over our houses. It wasn't falling from the sky to the ground. It was moving horizontally and flying right above the houses. It didn't make a sound, and it didn't have a tail of light behind it either. Before it disappeared, it flew slightly up and then it was gone. There was also a night where my mother and I were sitting on the porch and saw a star rapidly flashing a bunch of different colors, but then it flashed bright red and blinked out only to disappear in front of us. I eventually moved away for a few years, then moved back to that small town. This time, I had my 2-year-old son with me. We moved into the upstairs apartment of a building that sat diagonally across from the place I grew up. My old home had long since been torn down. I started having issues in the apartment. It began with hearing my son's voice calling for me even when he was peacefully asleep right next to me on the futon. Then I'd hear his toys moving around as though someone was playing with them, but again my son would be asleep beside me. Eventually all the activity started to die down. I felt comfortable enough to sleep in my room, and even began to feel more comfortable in the apartment. So I set up a bed for him in my room too. It was low on the ground, and he'd end up rolling off it from time to time like toddlers do. One night, my final straw with the spirit in the apartment, I heard my son making fussy noises and I woke up and looked in his direction. I noticed he wasn't in his bed, so I leaned further over my bed to see that he was on the floor. What I saw was him, still asleep, being dragged under my bed by something I could not see. I leaped off the bed, grabbed him, and turned on all the lights in the apartment and settled us both on the futon in the living room. After he fell back asleep, I stayed awake and alert until the morning. I called my grandma at around 8 a.m. and we did a cleansing on the apartment that afternoon. We didn't have another incident there afterwards, and we moved away a few months after that. I've gone back to visit my grandma a couple of times, and it's been 9 years since I moved away from that town. But in another year or so, we'll be moving back to take care of my grandma, so I'm sure there will be many more incidents in the future. This story happened back in the 1990s to my parents during their senior year of high school. Since their group of friends already had cars, the favorite thing they loved to do was night hiking around the state's local mental hospital, mainly to its old dairy farm. This was located on the side of a mountain surrounded by agricultural fields and an open grassland. Since the dairy farm was not too close to the mental hospital and the nearest city was about 5 miles or so away, at night the area was extra dark and quiet. You practically felt like you were in the middle of nowhere. Before the dairy farm was closed, the patients from the mental hospital would go there for work. During this time, some patients lost their lives at this location due to accidents. By the 1990s, it was abandoned and left like a ghost town of its own, especially due to its rumors of being extremely haunted. It made the perfect place for a fearful experience. So this night around 2 in the morning, my dad, mom, 4 of their female friends, and 1 male friend planned to go to the dairy farm. They took 2 cars, and when they got to the usual parking spot on the side of the mountain, they saw that there was already a group of 20 people standing around their cars. When my parents and their friends got out of their car, they noticed that the group of men all had shaved heads, were Caucasian, and in their mid-20s. As my parents walked past them, both groups ignored each other and avoided making eye contact. However, my mom turned her head to see one of the men, and as she did this, the man pulled back his jacket and turned his head to see her and showed a pistol tucked in his pants. Then he pulled back his lower lip, which revealed that it had KKK tattooed on his bottom lip. When they were out of hearing range, my mom whispered to my dad, "That man has a gun, and he has KKK tattooed on his lips." My dad brushed it off, thinking that my mom was over-exaggerating, and said it was too dark to even notice those 2 things. So with that, My parents and their friends walked through the grassland to get to the dairy farm. The hike to get there is about a half-mile from where they had parked, however. As soon as they got to the farm, they heard gunshots coming from the direction of the cars. Fearing that something had happened to their cars, they booked it back to the parking lot. When they got back, the group of men were already gone, but as they inspected their cars, they saw that all their tires were slashed, their windows were broken and smashed. My dad, who had used a particularly colored blanket as a seat cover, and his stereo were stolen. Now, my dad just stood there by the car, wondering what to do next. It's not like they could just call someone for help. Nobody had a cell phone, and since they were deep in a secluded area, they could not flag someone down for a quick pickup. The nearest gas station with a payphone was more than 5 miles away. Both my dad and his male friend did not want to leave the cars alone since they both drove classic cars, and they feared that the men would come back. Eventually, it was decided amongst them that sending both males to run to the payphones was the best option, leaving the women by themselves with the cars. This was because they feared that the shaved-head men are waiting down the road expecting them to walk to the payphone. My dad and his friend ran to the gas station as they left. My mom and her friends all gathered heavy rocks and whatever they could to use as protective weapons and hid away in the bushes and behind the trees. 2 hours had passed and my mom noticed headlights coming down the road. 2 tow trucks rolled into the parking lot. An immense fear spread throughout the group until they said that out of the tow trucks came my dad, his brothers, and the friend. They hooked up the cars to the tow trucks and were out of there in a matter of minutes. My dad told my mom as they were running down the dark and empty road, they kept their eyes open just in case the men were hiding their cars with the lights off. Luckily, they did get to the gas station without much of a problem. This next part may be hard to believe, but it is 100% true. 2 weeks had passed, and my dad managed to get his car fully repaired and drivable again. My mom and dad were driving to the local store where they parked and got out of the car. As they were walking into the store, a man was walking towards them. As he gets closer, my mom recognized this guy as the same shaved-head man who flashed a gun at her. My mom immediately told this to my dad, but just like the first time, my dad denied it was true. Then, 2 weeks later at the same store, my mom and dad were sitting in the car while my mom saw a car pull up next to them. As the man got out of the car and just stood there, she quickly noticed that it was the same man from before. My mom once again told my dad immediately, and again my dad denied it, but my mom looked into this car and saw the very recognizable, colorful blanket that my dad used as a seat cover. This was when my dad finally connected the dots and got out of the car to confront the man. But the man realized what was happening, jumped back into his car and drove away. They didn't have time to get the license plate. The next week, when my dad was filling gas into his car, a car pulled up right behind him, and lo and behold, it was the same man. My dad immediately got into the guy's face ready to confront him, but the man's friend got out of the car and pulled out a gun. The man with the gun had told everyone to get inside the car and the group drove away. It has been almost 30 years and they've never been seen again. To this day, my parents still wonder if all those encounters were a coincidence or something more sinister. Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true middle-of-nowhere horror stories sent in by viewers just like you. As always, if you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, whether it's a middle-of-nowhere experience or something entirely different, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net. I'm always looking for brand new, fresh, scary stories to share. If you enjoyed these stories tonight, please be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. The more likes this episode gets, the more YouTube promotes it, and that's very helpful to the swamp. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, be sure to give us a 5-star rating over there, as it helps us out a ton as well. If you don't have YouTube Premium but still want to listen to your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories no matter where you are, you can download them absolutely free from Spotify, Apple Podcast, Stitcher Radio, and just about everywhere else you find your favorite podcast online. I'd love to know in the comments down below what story was your favorite tonight. This helps me pick out better stories in the future and is very much appreciated. If you would like to support the swamp outside of all of that, maybe check out the merch store. We have t-shirts, hoodies, and more. I'd love to see you guys wearing some cool swamp threads. Don't forget, I'm now streaming on Twitch. If you're looking for hours and hours of fun with the Swamp Dweller, join me over on twitch.tv/swampdwelleryt. You can also find a link to do so in the description. Thank you guys so much for supporting the swamp the way you do. I wouldn't be able to do this on a daily basis without you guys. Don't forget to join me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and I'll see you all soon with another creepy video.